The room was heavy with tension, the kind that clings to the air like damp fog, making every breath feel labored. It was a spacious study in their sprawling mansion, lined with mahogany bookshelves that stretched to the ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes that spoke of wealth and intellect, or at least the appearance of it. The late afternoon sun filtered through heavy velvet curtains, casting long shadows across the polished oak floor. The couple stood at opposite ends of the room, their voices sharp, cutting through the stillness like shards of glass. She was 7 months pregnant, her silhouette softened by the curve of her belly, her hands instinctively resting on it as if to shield the life inside. Her name was Emily, a woman whose quiet strength had always been her armor, though it was wearing thin now. Her husband, Charles, was a man whose success in the financial world had made him a millionaire many times over, but whose temper had grown as volatile as his bank account was vast. He stood by the fireplace, his face flushed, a leather-bound first edition of some obscure classic clutched in his hand. The argument had started over something trivial, a missed dinner, a comment about his late nights at the office, but it had spiraled, as their arguments often did, into something far uglier. "You never listen," Charles shouted, his voice booming, echoing off the high ceiling. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, burned with a fury that made Emily take a step back. "You think you can just waltz around, spending my money, questioning my decisions, like you're the one who built this empire." Emily's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady, though it trembled at the edges. "I'm not questioning you, Charles. I'm asking you to be here, to be present. For me. For our child." Her hand pressed harder against her stomach, a subconscious plea for calm, for both herself and the baby. He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that made her flinch. "Present. You want me to play house while you sit there, doing nothing but growing that thing inside you. You're a liability, Emily. A drain." The words stung, but she'd heard worse from him in recent months. The pregnancy had changed things, his impatience with her had grown, his affection had withered. She'd tried to chalk it up to stress, to the pressure of his work, but the truth was harder to ignore. Charles was unraveling, and she was caught in the crossfire. "Don't talk about our child like that," she said, her voice low but firm. "This is your family, Charles. You don't get to dismiss us." He stepped closer, the book still in his hand, his knuckles white around its spine. "Family," he spat. "You think you're entitled to anything because you're carrying my kid. You're nothing without me. Nothing." The air seemed to thicken, time slowing as Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to leave, to walk away from the venom in his words, but her feet felt rooted to the floor. She saw the shift in his eyes, the moment when anger tipped into something reckless. Before she could react, he raised the book and hurled it across the room. It wasn't a light paperback, but a heavy, antique tome, its weight amplified by the force of his rage. Emily tried to duck, but it struck her temple with a sickening thud. Pain exploded in her head, white-hot and disorienting, and she stumbled, clutching the edge of a nearby table to keep from falling. The room spun, her vision blurring as she sank to her knees, one hand still cradling her belly. "Emily." Charles's voice cut through the haze, but it sounded distant, tinged with something that might have been panic or regret. She couldn't tell. Her head throbbed, each pulse a reminder of the impact. She felt warmth trickling down her face, blood, she realized dimly, from where the book's sharp edge had broken the skin. He was at her side in an instant, his hands hovering but not touching, as if he didn't know what to do with her now that his anger had manifested into something tangible. "I didn't mean," he started, but she cut him off with a weak wave of her hand. "Don't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The pain was overwhelming, but worse was the fear, not for herself, but for the baby. She pressed her hand harder against her stomach, praying she'd feel movement, a kick, anything to reassure her. There was a flutter, faint but there, and relief washed over her, though it did little to dull the ache in her head. Charles called for the housekeeper, his voice unsteady now, stripped of its earlier venom. "Get the car," he barked, and within minutes, they were speeding toward the hospital. Emily sat in the back seat, her head resting against the cool window, her thoughts muddled by pain and shock. She didn't speak, didn't look at him. The man she'd married, the one she'd once believed loved her, had just thrown a book at her head. The reality of it was too much to process. At the hospital, the emergency room was a blur of white coats and sterile smells. A nurse guided Emily to a bed, her touch gentle but efficient, while Charles lingered in the background, his usual confidence replaced by a nervous energy. The doctor, a kind-faced woman with sharp eyes, examined Emily carefully, noting the swelling at her temple and the blood matted in her hair. "We'll need a CT scan," the doctor said, her tone professional but laced with concern. "And we'll monitor the baby to make sure everything's okay." Emily nodded, her throat tight. The baby. That was all that mattered now. She endured the tests, the cold gel of the ultrasound, the hum of machines, all while Charles sat in a corner, silent and pale. The ultrasound showed the baby was unharmed, its heartbeat strong and steady, and Emily let out a shaky breath, tears stinging her eyes. The CT scan revealed a mild concussion, the doctor explained later, her voice calm but firm. "You'll need rest, no screens, no stress. We'll keep you overnight for observation, but you should recover fully with time. The baby's fine, which is the important thing." Emily nodded again, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept replaying the moment, the book flying through the air, the look in Charles's eyes. She'd seen anger in him before, but this was different. This was violence. And she couldn't unsee it. By the time her mother, Margaret Hensley, arrived at the hospital, Emily was exhausted, her head still throbbing despite the painkillers. Margaret was a neurologist, a woman whose career had been built on precision and compassion, but her face now was a mask of barely contained fury. She took one look at her daughter, pale, bruised, lying in a hospital bed, and turned to Charles, who was still hovering awkwardly near the door. "What did you do?" Margaret's voice was low, dangerous, each word clipped with the weight of her anger. "It was an accident," Charles said quickly, his hands raised defensively. "I didn't mean to hurt her. It was just a book." "Just a book." Margaret's eyes narrowed, her years of medical training giving her an uncanny ability to see through excuses. "You threw a heavy object at my pregnant daughter's head, and she has a concussion. That's not an accident, Charles. That's assault." Emily watched the exchange, her heart heavy. She wanted to speak, to tell her mother to stop, to tell Charles to leave, but the words wouldn't come. She felt small, fragile, like the girl she'd been before she'd met Charles, before she'd let herself believe in his promises of a perfect life. Margaret didn't wait for Charles to respond. She turned to the doctor, her colleague, and spoke in the clipped, professional tone of someone used to being in control. "I want a full report of her injuries. Everything. And I want it documented." The doctor nodded, sensing the gravity of the situation. Charles tried to interject, but Margaret silenced him with a look. "You've done enough," she said, her voice like steel. "You're lucky I'm not calling the police right now." But Margaret did call the police. Later that night, after Charles had left the hospital under the pretense of giving Emily space. She filed charges, her hands shaking as she recounted the incident to the officer on duty. Assault, she called it, and she made sure every detail was recorded. The weight of the book, the force of the throw, the concussion diagnosis. She wasn't just a mother protecting her daughter, she was a neurologist who knew the long-term risks of head injuries, especially to a pregnant woman. She wouldn't let this slide. Emily, lying in her hospital bed, felt the weight of her mother's decision. She didn't know if she was ready to face the consequences, Charles's anger, the public scrutiny, the unraveling of their marriage. But as she rested her hand on her belly, feeling the soft kicks of her unborn child, she knew one thing for certain, she couldn't go back to the way things were. Not after this. The incident that has gripped public attention, a millionaire allegedly throwing a book at his pregnant wife, resulting in a concussion, followed by her neurologist mother filing charges, has unfolded into a complex saga that weaves together themes of wealth, domestic strife, medical expertise, and legal repercussions. As the story continues to unravel, it reveals layers of personal conflict, societal expectations, and the intricate dynamics of a family under scrutiny. This expansion delves deeper into the aftermath of the event, exploring the emotional, legal, and social ramifications for those involved, while piecing together the broader context of such a high-profile case. The initial shock of the incident reverberated far beyond the confines of the couple's luxurious home. The wife, whose identity has been partially shielded to protect her privacy, was reportedly in her second trimester of pregnancy when the altercation occurred. The act of violence, involving a book, described in some reports as a heavy hardcover, being hurled with force, left her dazed and in pain. She sought medical attention shortly after, where a neurologist confirmed she had sustained a concussion. This diagnosis, while not life-threatening, raised immediate concerns for both her health and that of her unborn child. Concussions during pregnancy can carry risks, including potential impacts on maternal stress levels and fetal development, though medical experts note that outcomes vary depending on severity and treatment. The wife's condition required close monitoring, with follow-ups to ensure no lingering neurological effects would complicate her pregnancy. The neurologist who diagnosed the concussion was none other than the wife's mother, a respected figure in her field with decades of experience in treating brain injuries. Her dual role as both a concerned parent and a medical professional added a unique dimension to the case. Upon learning of her daughter's injury, she didn't hesitate to act, not only as a caregiver but also as an advocate for justice. Her decision to file charges against her son-in-law, the millionaire accused of the assault, was driven by a mix of maternal instinct and professional outrage. As a neurologist, she understood the potential long-term consequences of even a mild traumatic brain injury, particularly for a pregnant woman. Her expertise lent credibility to the legal complaint, as she provided detailed medical documentation to support the claim of harm. This move transformed the incident from a private domestic dispute into a public legal battle, drawing intense media scrutiny. The millionaire, whose wealth stems from a successful tech empire, found himself at the center of a storm. Known for his philanthropy and polished public persona, the allegations painted a starkly different picture, one of impulsivity and aggression. Sources close to the couple suggest the altercation stemmed from a heated argument, though the specifics remain murky. Some speculate financial stress, despite his wealth, or disagreements over lifestyle choices may have fueled the tension. Others point to the pressures of impending parenthood, which can strain even the most stable relationships. Whatever the trigger, the act of throwing a book was not only a physical assault but also a symbolic breach of trust, shattering the image of a perfect marriage often projected by high-profile couples. The legal proceedings that followed were swift and unforgiving. The neurologist mother's filing of charges, likely including assault and possibly reckless endangerment, given the pregnancy, set off a chain of events that thrust the family into the public eye. The millionaire hired a top-tier legal team, known for defending high-profile clients in domestic disputes. Their strategy appeared to focus on minimizing the incident, framing it as a momentary lapse rather than a pattern of behavior. They argued that the book throwing was an impulsive act, not intended to cause serious harm, and emphasized the couple's otherwise stable relationship. However, the prosecution, bolstered by the mother's medical testimony, countered that the injury's potential impact on both the wife and unborn child warranted serious consequences. The courtroom became a battleground for competing narratives. On one side, the defense portrayed the millionaire as a man under pressure, whose actions were out of character and deeply regretted. They introduced character witnesses, business associates, friends, and even charitable organizations he'd supported, to vouch for his integrity. On the other side, the prosecution leaned heavily on the medical evidence, with the neurologist mother providing expert testimony on the risks of concussions, particularly in the context of pregnancy. Her testimony was compelling, blending clinical precision with emotional weight as she described her daughter's distress and the potential for lasting harm. The contrast between the millionaire's polished public image and the private reality of the incident became a focal point, raising questions about privilege, accountability, and the hidden dynamics of elite households. Beyond the courtroom, the case sparked a broader conversation about domestic violence, particularly in affluent circles. Advocates pointed out that wealth and status often shield perpetrators, allowing incidents to be downplayed or swept under the rug. The involvement of a neurologist mother, whose professional standing gave her the tools to challenge this pattern, was seen as a turning point. Her willingness to pursue charges, despite the potential for public backlash or family discord, highlighted the importance of holding even powerful individuals accountable. Social media platforms buzzed with opinions, some defending the millionaire as a victim of circumstance, others condemning him as emblematic of unchecked privilege. Hashtags like #JusticeForHer and #NoExcuseForAbuse trended, reflecting public outrage and support for the wife. The wife herself remained largely silent, her voice absent from the public narrative. This silence was interpreted in various ways. Some saw it as a sign of her processing trauma, others as a strategic choice to let the legal process unfold. Her pregnancy added a layer of complexity, as public sympathy gravitated toward her and her unborn child. Reports suggest she moved out of the shared home, seeking refuge with her mother or close friends, though details were scarce to protect her privacy. Her absence from the spotlight only amplified speculation, with tabloids and online forums dissecting every rumored detail of her life, from her marriage to her plans for motherhood. The neurologist mother emerged as a formidable figure in the saga. Her expertise and resolve made her a powerful advocate, but they also exposed her to scrutiny. Critics questioned whether her dual role as mother and medical professional blurred ethical lines, suggesting she might be leveraging her expertise to escalate the case. Supporters, however, saw her as a hero, using her knowledge to protect her daughter and challenge a system that often favors the wealthy. Her actions also shed light on the broader issue of brain injuries in domestic violence cases, which are frequently underreported or misdiagnosed. By framing the incident through a medical lens, she brought attention to the physical and psychological toll of such acts, particularly on vulnerable populations like pregnant women. As the legal battle progressed, the millionaire faced mounting pressure. His business interests, which included investments in tech startups and real estate, began to suffer as partners distanced themselves. Public relations firms worked overtime to salvage his reputation, issuing statements about his commitment to making amends and seeking counseling. Yet, the damage was done. The case became a cautionary tale about the fragility of public personas and the consequences of private actions spilling into the public domain. For the wife, the road to recovery, both physical and emotional, remained uncertain, with her pregnancy adding urgency to her healing process. The neurologist mother, meanwhile, continued to push for justice, her resolve unshaken by the complexities of the case. The incident, though rooted in a single act, exposed fault lines in a marriage, a family, and a society grappling with issues of power, privilege, and accountability. It served as a stark reminder that wealth cannot insulate against human flaws or the consequences of violence. As the case moves toward resolution, its ripple effects will likely linger, shaping public discourse and personal lives for years to come. https://www.dailymail.co.uk/news/article-2985930/mum-3-motor-neuron-disease-trying-money-life-saving-money-dodgy-canadian-doctor.html.